Jesus' secret words, never translated, Talithakumi, called back from the dead. The words, Jesus, never. Translated, how ancient Aramaic frequencies still heal and awaken us. 2,000 years ago, a man stood in the middle of a crowd and spoke words so powerful that the people who recorded them refused to translate them. They wrote everything else in Greek, the most widely spoken language of their world, but these specific words they left exactly as they sounded coming out of his mouth. Those words were in Aramaic, the living language of Jesus, a tongue where sound and meaning and spirit are not three separate things, but one single force. What you are about to hear are not religious phrases. They are vibrational keys that operate at the intersection of consciousness and the hidden teachings that the gospel writers encoded for those who have ears to truly hear. 3 words survived the silence of 2 millennia, each one connected to a miracle, each one carrying a frequency that was never meant to be locked inside a church. These are the words Ephatha, Eli Lama, Sabbath, and Talithakumi. And by the end of this video, you will understand not only what they mean, but why they still activate something ancient and awake inside the human soul. Stay with me, because what begins here does not end when the video stops. It begins inside you. Before the first word is spoken, before the first miracle is touched, you need to understand why Aramaic was different from every other language in the ancient world. Most ancient languages were built to describe reality. Aramaic was built to inhabit it. The structure of the language is not linear, it is holographic, meaning each word carries layers of meaning that exist simultaneously, not one after another. And this is not a metaphor. It is a grammatical and phonetic truth confirmed by scholars of Semitic language for over a century. Jesus was born into a world of linguistic plurality. He almost certainly spoke Greek in commercial contexts, read Hebrew in the synagogue scrolls, and heard Latin from Roman soldiers. But when he healed, when he wept, when he cried out to the divine, he spoke Aramaic. And the disciples noticed. They did not merely record what he said in 3 specific moments of extraordinary power. They preserved the exact sound, the exact sequence of consonants and breath, because they understood that the translation was a reduction, not an equivalent. The Gnostic texts of Hammadi, discovered in 1945 in Upper Egypt, offer a deeper layer to this understanding. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus speaks of a light that was before creation, not a theological concept, but a vibrational state. In the Gospel of Philip, language itself is described as a living force, with certain words carrying the power to transform the one who speaks them. These are not fringe ideas. They are the inner tradition that ran parallel to the public teaching, passed to those ready to receive it. What Gnostic wisdom and modern acoustic research agree on is this: the human body is a resonant chamber, and certain sound combinations activate states that ordinary language cannot reach. The Aramaic words preserved in the Gospels are not relics. They are tuning forks, and the 3 we will examine today cover the full arc of human spiritual experience, from the sealed and closed, to the broken and abandoned, to the dead and restored. These 3 words are a complete map of the inner journey, encoded in sound by a teacher who knew exactly what he was doing. The Gnostic tradition speaks of the kenema, the deficient world of illusion, and the pleroma, the fullness of divine light. Every teaching of Jesus in the inner tradition points toward the path from one to the other. These 3 Aramaic words are not decoration on that path. They are the path itself, spoken aloud, given to human mouths, so that the journey from darkness to light could happen not only in the mind, but in the body, in the breath, in the vibrating air, between one soul and the God it seeks. Ephatha, the word that opens what has been sealed human mouths, so that the journey from darkness to light could happen not only in the mind, but in the body, in the breath, in the vibrating air between one soul and the God it seeks. Eli Lama, Sabachthani, the cry that holds the cosmos together. My God, why have you handed me over into this? At the 9th hour, in the darkness that covered the land at midday, Jesus cried out in Aramaic words that shook the witnesses so deeply that some of them thought he was calling the prophet Elijah, Eli Lama Sabachthani. The only words spoken on the cross that were preserved in the original tongue were not a cry of defeat. They were the most honest and most powerful prayer ever uttered in human history, and they carry a Gnostic depth that has been almost entirely buried under 2,000 years of theological interpretation. The word sabachthani is the key that unlocks everything. It is almost always translated as forsaken or abandoned. But in Aramaic, the root shbq carries not only the meaning of leaving but also of entrusting, of handing over, of releasing into the care of something greater. This is the same root used when a craftsman hands a finished piece to the one who commissioned it. Jesus was not saying that God had abandoned him. It was sighing, in the language of Aramaic ambiguity, that God had handed him fully into the experience, had entrusted him with the deepest darkness, so that the light could be demonstrated from within it. The Gnostic tradition, particularly in the Gospel of Truth, found at Nag Hammadi, speaks of the ignorance, the great forgetting that separates consciousness from its divine source, as producing anguish and terror in the soul. The cry of Eli, Eli, is the voice of consciousness fully inside. That forgetting, not pretending, not performing, but truthfully experiencing the sensation of separation from the pleroma. And this is precisely why it is sacred. It is the only prayer in human spiritual history that does not dress the wound before speaking. It speaks from inside the wound. For the Gnostic tradition, this moment on the cross is not a moment of failure. It is the supreme demonstration of Gnosis in action. True knowledge of the divine does not arrive in comfort. It arrives in the complete experience of apparent abandonment, where the soul has nowhere to go except for. The psalm that Jesus was quoting, Psalm 22, does not end in despair. It ends in triumph. Jesus chose those opening words not to express despair, but to invoke the entire arc of the psalm into the moment. The darkness and the dawn together, spoken as one Aramaic utterance. The inner teaching is this: there are moments in every soulless journey when the signal from the pleroma goes silent, when the inner light seems to have withdrawn, when the connection that was once luminous becomes opaque and cold. These moments are not signs of spiritual failure. They are initiations. The cry of Eli, Eli, is the sacred permission to be exactly where you are, without pretense, without performance, without the pressure to feel something you do not feel. It is the Gnostic teaching that authentic presence, even in darkness, is itself a form of light. If you feel drawn to go further, a guide already exists. The two most important Aramaic words, Iphatha plus and Ananura, that symbolize the beginning of everything. Correct sound, full meaning, and a sacred protocol for those two words. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. In the next video, I will reveal another sacred Aramaic word connected to the teachings of Jesus. Talithakumi, the resurrection that was never meant for one girl. Talithakumi, Talithakumi, little lamb, arise, I call you back into life. G.R.S was a synagogue ruler, a man of institution, of religious structure, of the visible world. And he fell at the feet of Jesus and begged. His daughter was dying. By the time they reached the house, the mourners were already there, weeping and wailing in the customary ritual of grief. Jesus looked at the scene and said she was not dead, but sleeping. They laughed at him. He cleared the room. He took the girl's hand, and into the silence of that room, in the presence only of her parents and his closest disciples, he spoke two Aramaic words. Talithakumi. Talitha is not a formal title. It is a term of the deepest affection the word a Galilean mother would use for her small daughter, carrying the warmth of lamb, of tenderness, of the beloved who is known by heart and not by name alone. Kumi is the command to rise, but in Aramaic it is also the command to be awake, to stand upright in your identity, to take back the posture of one who is alive. Together the two words form something that no resurrection formula in any religious tradition has ever equaled. An intimate call from love to love, asking the soul to return not to duty but to life. Mark's account adds a detail that every other evangelist omits and that the Gnostic reader cannot overlook. Immediately after the girl stood up and walked, Jesus told them to give her something to eat. The resurrection was not a spectacle, it was a complete restoration of the living, embodied self. The Gnostic tradition warns against a spirituality that escapes the body, that seeks light by abandoning matter. The teaching of Talithakumi is precisely the opposite. The divine does not call the soul away from life. It calls the soul back into full embodied presence, hungry and walking and real. In the Gospel of Thomas, saying 113, a disciple asks Jesus where the kingdom of the Father is. And Jesus answers, "It is spread out upon the earth, and people do not see it." Talithakumi is the sound of that seeing being restored. It is spoken to every part of the human soul that has gone unconscious, the dreams that were buried under practicality, the joy that was put to sleep by grief, the identity that was pronounced dead by circumstance, the inner knowing that was silenced by the noise of the kinema. The girl in the story is every one of us in our most collapsed state. The protocol of Talithakumi in the inner teaching is therefore not a one-time resurrection, but a daily practice of calling back what has been lost. The Gnostic understanding of consciousness is that it dims gradually, not in a single catastrophe, but in a slow withdrawal from the pleroma layer by layer, until the soul lies motionless inside a life that functions but does not truly live. Talithakumi reverses that process. It speaks with the authority of love into the specific places of inner death, and it does not negotiate, it simply calls, in the tone of one who already knows the answer before the question is finished. What becomes visible when you place these three Aramaic words side by side is not a collection of miracles. It is a complete diagram of the inner spiritual path, encoded in sound, preserved across 2 millennia, and waiting for the consciousness that is developed enough to read it. Ephatha is the beginning of the Gnostic path. The moment the sealed soul first admits that something is closed, that the signal from the pleroma has been blocked, and makes the decision to allow an opening, it is the first act of gnosis, the recognition of one's own sealed condition. Eli Lama, sabachthani, is the middle of the path, and it is the part that no tradition likes to talk about because it is dark, because it is uncomfortable, because it does not look like spirituality from the outside. It is the crossing of the abyss, which the Gnostic texts call the kenotic passage, the emptying of false certainty, the dissolution of the ego's constructed relationship with the divine, until what remains is not a belief in God, but a direct and naked experience of either presence or absence. This is where the deepest gnosis lives. Talithakumi is the completion of the arc. Not a return to who you were before the journey, but the rising of a new consciousness into the same body, the same life, the same circumstances that were once experienced as death. In the Valentinian Gnostic tradition, this is called the restoration of the pneuma, the divine spark fully reintegrated with the living self, breathing, walking, hungry, awake. The girl who was raised did not float away into a spiritual realm. She walked. She ate. She was fully here. The vibrational dimension of these 3 words follows the same arc. Ephatha opens. It is an outward, expansive sound. Consonants that push the lips and palate apart. A breath that cannot be made while remaining clenched. Eli Lama sabatani descends, the vowels fall, the body contracts. The sound comes from a place below the sternum where grief and longing live, and it does not pretend to rise until the full depth has been reached. Talithakumi ascends. The rhythm of the syllables is a literal lifting. Talithakumi, a cadence that the body follows almost involuntarily upward. The teaching of the Nag Hammadi of truth states that when ignorance, the great forgetting, came to exist, truth was not created alongside it as an equal. Truth existed first, and ignorance is simply the absence of it, the way darkness is not a force, but the absence of light. These 3 Aramaic words are the sound of truth reasserting itself through 3 progressively deeper layers of the human experience. First, it opens what was sealed. Then it cries honestly from the place of greatest darkness. Then it calls the dead back to life. This is not theology. It is a vibrational map, and it works because it is true. The 3 keys and how to use them now. Everything that has been explored in this video converges on a single truth, that the Gnostic tradition and the living practice of Aramaic both affirm words spoken with full consciousness, full breath, and full intention are not communications about reality. They are participations in it. Ephatha is not a prayer asking for something to open. It is the vibration of opening itself, placed inside the human mouth and given to every soul that has ever stood before a sealed door, wondering if light exists on the other side. Eli Lama sabachthani is not a prayer of despair to be avoided. It is the most courageous sound a soul can make, the willingness to be fully honest inside the darkness to maintain the conversation with the divine, even when the divine appears to have gone silent, to speak the ancient words of Psalm 22, and trust that the arc of that psalm, from desolation to deliverance, is the arc of every authentic spiritual life. The gnosis that is born in that darkness is unlike anything that arrives in comfort, because it is not learned. It is lived. Talithakumi is the promise that nothing is permanently dead inside you. Not the dream, not the joy, not the identity, not the connection to the pleroma that seemed to dissolve in the long years of living inside the same voice that called a 12-year-old girl back into her body from the threshold of death is the same voice that speaks inside the silence of your own consciousness. When you have finally become quiet enough to hear it, not as a sound from outside, but as the original frequency of your own inner light recognizing itself. The protocol is simple because the teaching was always simple at its core. Find the word that corresponds to where you are right now. If you are sealed and cannot move forward, Ephatha is your word. If you are in the middle of the dark and need to be honest before you can be helped, Eli Lama Sabachthani is your cry. If you know that something in you needs to be called back to life, a part of yourself you buried, a capacity you abandoned, a light you were told was too bright, then Talithakumi is the sound of your return. Speak it aloud. Speak it in the dark of early morning before any other voice reaches you. Speak it slowly, honoring every syllable, understanding that you are not repeating a foreign phrase, but activating a frequency that has waited 2,000 years for a consciousness developed enough to receive it. The Gnostic path is not a path of information, it is a path of transformation. And transformation begins, as it always has, with the word, with the breath behind the word, and with the silence that follows when the word has done what only it can do. Everything begins with Aramaic words. Ephatha tambarana, and ushara, a complete guide, correct sound, full meaning, and sacred protocol is now available for those ready to start this journey. The door is open. Check the pinned comment. Subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and write in the comments what you thought of this content.